Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was just fiercely cornered by Senator Richard Blumenthal over a missing $25 billion. And if you want to uncover the truth behind closed doors, you cannot afford to look away. As an American, you absolutely need to see this video because the administration aggressively claims the public believes their narrative, but the reality is the American people simply aren't buying it. If you do not want to miss the real, unvarnished footage of what actually transpires at the highest levels of government, do not look away. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was just fiercely cornered over a missing $25 billion in a clash that wasn't just a standard budget dispute. Watch closely how this intense and revealing confrontation begins. Senator Blumenthal initiated the inquiry by stating that the committee had received a highly scrutinized financial estimate from Mr. Hegseth yesterday, which suggested that the official cost to date in dollars for this war has been $25 billion. Blumenthal made it unequivocally clear that he believes this low number is well below the actual true cost, a conclusion firmly based on everything he had heard and everything available to the committee in various kinds of classified and unclassified settings. He firmly stated that he was going to ask for a much more accurate assessment of the financial drain. But the senator did not stop at financial numbers. He powerfully shifted the committee's focus to the human toll, noting that we also know that about 400 service members have been wounded as a direct result of this ongoing war. He exposed a grim bureaucratic reality. When these brave individuals retire and eventually come home, their hard-earned retirement pay will be cruelly docked dollar for every single disability benefit dollar they receive. Directing his focus sharply, Blumenthal asked Secretary Hegseth for his explicit commitment that he will throw his weight behind the Major Richard Starr Act, which is vital legislation that will definitively eliminate this deeply unjust wounded warrior tax. Blumenthal noted he was absolutely sure Hegseth was familiar with the bill, emphasizing the tragedy that tens of thousands of servicemen and women right now are reduced in their retirement pay, literally for every dollar of disability benefits they receive. Secretary Hegseth offered a practiced response, saying he appreciated the senator's focus on this highly sensitive issue. He attempted to provide contextual damage control by telling the senator that of the roughly 400 mentioned who have been injured, thankfully over 90% are returned to duty, though he reluctantly admitted that doesn't mean they wouldn't have a residual challenge upon returning. Hegseth quickly added that the department is tracking the situation at the point of injury to ensure that it is officially noted, even though the service members are returned to duty. Not letting him deflect from the legislative question, Blumenthal interjected, stating that what he truly wanted was a firm, uncompromising commitment that Hegseth will support the Major Richard Starr Act. Cornered under oath, Hegseth finally conceded, stating that as he had said in the past to other organizations, the Defense Department does indeed support the Richard Starr Act. Blumenthal offered a quick thank you before turning his intense scrutiny back to the issue of the missing billions, directly addressing budget official Mr. Hegseth. He asked a comprehensive question. Does that $25 billion estimate actually include all of the massive hidden costs in terms of catastrophic damage to our bases, the pressing need to replace destroyed planes and munitions, and the long-term medical costs of injuries to our servicemen and women? Senator Hegseth replied with a bureaucratic shield, stating that for the military construction, or MILCON, facilities replacement cost, it is probably the hardest thing to accurately estimate right now. He justified this evasion by claiming the department simply doesn't know what our future military posture is going to be or what the future construction requirements of those overseas bases will entail. Blumenthal rejected this excuse entirely, looking at Hegseth and declaring that he owes it to the committee to provide real numbers. The senator reminded him of the undeniable power dynamic. You're here to ask for taxpayer appropriations, and therefore, Blumenthal would like a much more accurate estimate of what has actually been done that will ultimately require massive replacement and renovation, along with all the other associated hidden costs. Blumenthal then dropped a financial bombshell, stating his belief that the $25 billion estimate is probably less than half, and maybe even less than a quarter of the total comprehensive cost of the war. He logically pointed out that this vast discrepancy is precisely the reason why the administration's supplemental funding request is so much higher than the stated base cost. Consequently, he declared that these public officials owe it to the American people to finally give us the straight talk about what the true financial costs have actually been. This incredible buildup sets the stage for the ultimate clip, which is coming up right now. Before the footage plays, viewers are strongly urged to hit subscribe, like the video, and let everyone know exactly who is right. Below a highly questionable $25 billion price tag, thousands of financially penalized veterans, and a sitting defense secretary blatantly dodging direct questions. That sequence of evasions alone made this hearing incredibly critical, but Senator Blumenthal was just getting started with his dismantling of the official narrative. He deliberately and masterfully shifted the entire focus away from budget resources to something much more serious and foundational: the administration's overarching credibility and the fundamental integrity of the official story being sold to the public. Addressing the secretary once again, Blumenthal noted that Hegseth had previously characterized this conflict as an astonishing military success, to quote his exact words from yesterday, but Blumenthal reiterated a crushing truth: the American people simply aren't buying it. Blumenthal acknowledged that Hegseth might stubbornly feel the American people are seeing through the information thrown at them, but the senator stressed that one specific point remains historically irrefutable: America never succeeds in war unless the American people are firmly behind it. He warned Hegseth that if what the administration is seeing as success right now is their definition of winning, he would genuinely hate to see what losing actually looks like, simply because none of the shifting, vague, and contradictory objectives of the war so far have been successfully achieved. Likewise, Blumenthal introduced a staggering and controversial claim, asking Hegseth about the president going on record yesterday to say that Ukraine has been, quote, militarily defeated. Blumenthal stated his assumption that Hegseth surely didn't agree with that shocking assessment. Instead of providing a direct, honest answer, Hegseth loudly complained about the negative nature in which Blumenthal characterized what Hegseth viewed as the incredible and historic effort in Iran, claiming this negativity from politicians is a major part of the reason why the American people view the conflict the way they do. Hegseth further elaborated on his disdain for outside scrutiny, proudly stating that this is why he looked out at the press corps at the Pentagon and derisively called them the Pharisees in the press, accusing the journalists of constantly looking for every single problem. As they aggressively talked over each other, Blumenthal tried to emphasize his crucial point that the administration's claim that Ukraine has been militarily defeated is a completely false narrative based on the hard evidence he gathered during his 9 trips to Ukraine. Hegseth continued to push his own narrative, loudly stating they are 2 months into a historic military success in Iran and accusing Blumenthal of wanting to falsely call it a defeat. He further escalated his attacks, accusing defeatist Democrats like Blumenthal of deliberately clouding the mind of the American people, claiming the public would otherwise fully support the mission of preventing Iran from having a nuclear weapon. Blumenthal gracefully pushed back against the partisan noise, praising the administration in Ukraine by saying they are bravely fighting our fight, which he noted is the exact reason he is rigorously pursuing the Russian sanctions bill. He highlighted that this legislative effort is deeply bipartisan, working alongside Republican Senator Graham, and expressed his profound hope that the U.S. government will finally recognize its solemn obligation to officially release that $400 million in frozen assistance. Secretary Hegseth likely thought that aggressively running out the clock with talking points ended the difficult discussion, but it most certainly didn't. That final, ominous warning from Senator Blumenthal successfully turned what should have been a routine budget hearing into a massive, highly visible showdown over $25 billion missing dollars. However, it is vital to understand that the true underlying tension in that room started long before they openly argued over missing billions. It actually started with a deeply unjust financial penalty that has been quietly and systematically robbing our disabled veterans since the year 1891. Blumenthal expertly cornered Hegseth on the wounded warrior tax, describing it accurately as a structural injustice that cruelly docks military retirees $1 of their fairly earned pension for every single dollar of crucial disability compensation they receive. Because of this archaic rule, these heroes are literally paying for their own combat injuries. The Major Richard Starr Act, named honoring a fallen Special Forces hero, specifically aims to finally fix this. Yet, self-serving Washington politicians have repeatedly and shamefully let it fail in the shadows of committee maneuvers. Therefore, forcing the sitting defense secretary to explicitly endorse it under oath was an incredibly rare legislative breakthrough. But as every battle-hardened veteran knows, a verbal promise made by an official in a Senate hearing means absolutely nothing until it actually becomes signed law. Blumenthal seamlessly moved from that glaring injustice directly to the broader cost question, and this is exactly where the hearing began to deeply reveal something significantly larger about government transparency. The highly debated $25 billion figure cited by Jay Hurst represents absolutely nothing more than what the Defense Department is willing to officially put on paper in a highly public appropriation setting where they are asking for money. Blumenthal's deep skepticism that this official number is actually less than half, possibly less than a quarter of the actual total, is not some fabricated partisan invention. The grim reality is that war cost accounting at the federal level has historically been one of the most chronically underreported and obfuscated categories in all of government finance. For instance, the massive Iraq and Afghanistan wars were financed almost entirely through emergency supplemental appropriations rather than the standard-based defense budget, which is a deliberate accounting practice that made the true, staggering annual cost incredibly difficult for the public to track. Renowned Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz and Harvard budget expert Linda Bilmes famously argued back in 2008 that the true comprehensive cost of the Iraq war was actually well over $3 trillion when vital factors like long-term veteran care, interest on borrowed war financing, and macroeconomic effects were accurately included. The financial pattern of deception Blumenthal was pointing to is not new at all. What was truly striking is that he was pointing to it directly while the administration's representatives were simultaneously sitting in the room, actively asking for more taxpayer money. Hurst's evasive answer about military construction costs being supposedly hard to estimate because the future global posture is unknown was technically defensible in a bureaucratic sense, but it was incredibly politically evasive. When a sitting United States senator explicitly tells a budget official in an appropriations hearing that he owes the committee a straight, honest answer, that is absolutely not a mere rhetorical flourish. The undeniable fact is that the committee controls the money, and the witness is only sitting in that chair because he urgently needs that money appropriated. The power dynamic in that hearing room is definitively not equal, and Blumenthal was making absolutely sure that Hurst clearly understood exactly where he was sitting. Then came the massive strategic shift that completely changed the entire temperature and trajectory of the hearing. The sharp transition from dry budget questions directly to the highly contested characterization of the Iran conflict was by no means accidental. Senator Blumenthal had constructed the first crucial portion of his allotted time incredibly carefully to build a specific narrative. He systematically linked veterans' benefits, massive war costs, and the glaring gap between official numbers and actual costs. Each of those carefully laid threads led directly to the exact same underlying foundational question, which is whether the American public is actually being told the truth about what this war has truly involved and exactly what it has actually achieved on the ground. By the time he finally reached the devastating sentence that appears right on the cover of this video, he had already securely laid a rock-solid foundation that made the challenge to the secretary completely unavoidable. The powerful phrase, "the American people aren't buying it," is one of those sentences that lands very differently depending on exactly where you are sitting in the political landscape. For Secretary Hegseth, it was seen as a direct, hostile provocation, but for Senator Blumenthal, it was a calculated observation, firmly rooted in something highly specific and undeniably true. It is vital to note that the senator did not outright say the war was a total failure. He simply said the administration's highly optimistic characterization of it as an astonishing military success was simply not landing with the public. That is a profoundly meaningful and important distinction in public policy. And the subsequent argument he made immediately after it, the absolute rule that America never succeeds in war unless the American people are firmly behind it, is not just a cheap partisan talking point. It is a firm, undeniable conclusion drawn directly from history. We saw public support for the Korean War collapse, and the conflict tragically ended in a bloody stalemate. We saw public support for Vietnam entirely collapse, and the Long War ended in a chaotic withdrawal. Conversely, domestic support for the Gulf War was incredibly high, and the military operation swiftly achieved its clearly stated objectives. The complex relationship between domestic public opinion and the ultimate military outcome is not always perfectly direct, but it is historically consistent enough that serious, high-level defense analysts take it incredibly seriously. Blumenthal was absolutely not editorializing for the cameras. He was intelligently invoking a heavily documented historical pattern. What occurred next in that fiery exchange fundamentally reframed the entire conversation, because Hegseth's immediate response was not to logically engage with the actual substance of the historical argument. Instead, he aggressively redirected his ire and attacks to the press. He bizarrely claimed the American people view the war negatively, specifically because of how the media chooses to cover it. And he proudly cited the specific moment when he publicly called the Pentagon press corps the Pharisees. That disturbing image, the sitting defense secretary publicly utilizing a deeply loaded biblical term specifically meant for hypocrites and pretenders to officially describe the journalists assigned to cover the very department he leads, is certainly not a minor or forgettable episode. It deeply reflects a deliberate, highly adversarial institutional posture toward any form of outside oversight and press scrutiny that has massive implications extending far beyond any single Senate hearing. Then the intense topic shifted to Ukraine, and this is undeniably the part of the hearing that has the absolute longest and most consequential tail. Blumenthal asked a remarkably direct, uncompromising question. Does Secretary Hegseth truly believe Ukraine has been militarily defeated? The President of the United States had explicitly said exactly that just the previous day. This was a highly specific, easily falsifiable claim about the current state of an active war involving a sovereign country that the United States has already committed billions of taxpayer dollars in military and financial assistance to support. Tellingly, Hegseth completely did not answer the question. He immediately pivoted back to Iran, loudly talked over Blumenthal, and resorted to utilizing the politically charged phrase defeatist Democrats. He stubbornly called the Iran operation a historic military success, while Blumenthal was merely trying to complete a vital sentence about the reality in Ukraine. The fundamental question was simply never answered, and in the halls of power, that glaring absence of an answer is itself crucial information. Blumenthal's pointed reference to his 9 separate trips to Ukraine is absolutely not an incidental, throwaway detail. The senator has deliberately made those dangerous visits over the entire course of the bloody conflict, actively meeting face-to-face with top Ukrainian officials, frontline military commanders, and key civilian leadership. Because of this vast experience, his forceful characterization of the administration's claim that Ukraine has been militarily defeated as a completely false narrative that the president is foolishly buying from Vladimir Putin is the absolute sharpest and most consequential statement he made in the entire duration of the hearing. It is a monumental statement deeply worth pausing on and analyzing. Ukraine has indeed tragically lost significant territory. Its eastern regions have been suffering under relentless, sustained Russian military pressure for years on end. But despite this onslaught, vital Ukrainian state institutions remain completely functional. Its national military continues to proudly operate, its central government has absolutely not collapsed, and it continuously continues to urgently request and actively receive massive international support. The administration's official claim that the nation has been entirely militarily defeated simply does not match the clear, observable facts currently on the ground. And Senator Blumenthal was making sure to say so in incredibly explicit, undeniable terms on the public record. The highly specific Russian sanctions bill he mentioned in his closing remarks, the very one he is aggressively pursuing alongside Senator Graham, firmly places the entire initiative in deeply bipartisan territory. Senator Lindsey Graham is certainly not a political figure who is remotely associated with soft, accommodating positions on national security or with any sympathy whatsoever for Russian strategic interests. The remarkable fact that these two powerful senators from completely opposite sides of the political aisle are actively co-sponsoring aggressive Russia-targeted sanctions legislation, while the sitting executive branch is simultaneously declining to even characterize aggressive Russian territorial aggression as a direct threat to American interests, is a massive, profound tension that desperately deserves far more public attention than a single hearing moment allows. Furthermore, the massive sum of $400 million that Blumenthal explicitly referenced as being legally appropriated and still entirely unreleased represents yet another incredibly concrete and highly problematic pressure point. The United States Congress constitutionally appropriates funds. The executive branch, in turn, is strictly constitutionally required to actually spend that legally appropriated money. When an acting administration stubbornly holds back appropriated funds and flatly refuses to release them, it instantly raises massive constitutional separation of powers, questions that the federal courts have had to forcefully address before. Senator Blumenthal was absolutely not speaking in abstract, theoretical terms when he sternly reminded the room that the committee had legally appropriated that specific money. He was accurately describing a hard legal reality that carries real, devastating consequences for innocent people currently on the ground in Ukraine, depending on that promised support for survival. What the average viewer may not have fully, completely absorbed while watching the chaotic final minutes of that intense exchange is exactly how many incredibly important, completely unresolved threads were simply left hanging in the air when Chairman Wicker finally called time on the hearing. The massive, geopolitically vital Ukraine question never got anything resembling an answer. The deeply concerning cost accounting question got a minor, partial concession, but absolutely no firm commitment to a full, transparent public audit. The disgraceful wounded warrior tax finally extracted a reluctant verbal endorsement, but came with absolutely no concrete legislative timeline for repeal. And finally, the overarching foundational question regarding public credibility, which Blumenthal had expertly built the entire structure of the hearing around, simply ended in a bitter shouting match that frustratingly produced far more heat than it did actual light. We must understand that this outcome is absolutely not a mere accident of poor time management. Rather, it is the deliberate structural reality of exactly how high-stakes Senate hearings are designed to work. A questioning senator only has a strictly fixed number of minutes to extract the truth. Conversely, an evasive witness who simply does not want to answer a damaging question has more than enough bureaucratic and procedural tools readily available to successfully run out the clock and escape accountability. This frustrating reality leaves every single viewer with something profoundly important worth sitting with and contemplating. At exactly what point does the massive, glaring gap between what high-level government officials say on camera and what the hard evidence actually suggests become such a severe problem that the American political system can simply no longer absorb it quietly? We are forced to look at the bravely wounded warriors who are currently absorbing a deeply unfair pay cut for every single disability dollar they rightfully earned. We are forced to look at the hidden war costs that may be just a tiny fraction of the catastrophic real total being drained from the public treasury. We are forced to look at the vital international ally that the sitting president shockingly says has already lost, and the hundreds of millions in legally appropriated money that has suspiciously not moved an inch. It is crucial to recognize that each of these massive issues is technically a separate, distinct thread. But the undeniable reality is that they all came rushing out of the exact same budget hearing, articulated by the exact same veteran senator, directed pointedly at the exact same sitting administration, all on the exact same afternoon. That convergence is absolutely not a mere coincidence. That convergence paints a deeply disturbing, comprehensive picture of systemic evasion. The monumental question that currently remains unanswered for the American public is exactly who actually holds these powerful leaders accountable when the official government account and the observable, undeniable reality diverge this clearly and dangerously. But what do you, the viewer, actually think about this explosive situation? Do you believe that the deeply controversial wounded warrior tax is just a cold, necessary budget calculation made by bureaucrats? Or do you view it as a century-old, unforgivable betrayal of our bravest veterans? Furthermore, when a sitting defense secretary blatantly refuses to answer a direct, vital question about global security while testifying under oath, does the Washington establishment simply get a free pass to ignore the truth? We desperately want to know your thoughts, so please let us know in the comments section down below. To help support our ongoing mission of preserving these vital, often hidden archives and bringing real, undeniable accountability to light, make absolutely sure to like this video and officially subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch.